Okay.
Hello, everybody. Just want to make sure that everybody can see the stream and can hear me okay. So if you can give me a little hand wavy emoji, thumbs up or something to let me know that you can hear me okay. Sweet. Looks like people can hear me. We've got people from Germany, Istanbul, the Netherlands, UK, US. Awesome. Sounds good. Okay, so thanks everybody for joining me for the first ever live stream. It's been something that I wanted to do for a while, and finally just said throw a date on the calendar and said I'm going to do it. And I have a special guest with me today. I'd like to welcome to the stream Guy Rambo, who some of you may know from 9 to 5 Mac or from the unofficial WWDC app. So he's going to help me on the stream to build a simple Mac app today. So welcome, Guy. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us to this live stream. And yeah, let's make a simple Mac app for you today and hopefully show people that it's not that hard.
Right. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to bring up the Mac app that I want to build is for rev.com. So rev.com provides transcription services. And this is what I've been doing to get my videos transcribed so that we can have captions on all of the videos. And the general workflow for me, a lot of part of my workflow I like to automate. And so I've written some scripts to automate some of this. And rev.com has an API. And I was just going to write another Ruby script to do this for me, like I've done with basically everything else in my workflow. But I decided that A, I want to get back into Mac development. And B, it seems to be like kind of a hot topic right now where people are like, well, it's too hard, or how similar is it to UIKit and that sort of thing. And so this offered sort of a pretty simple app that we could build that will submit orders to rev.com and then check on the status of those orders. And then when the orders are complete, that I can download the attachments, the actual transcribed files. The details about the API are not that important, and I can cover those in a future screencast or something like that, or maybe a live stream, but I wanted to focus just on the Mac app portion of that. So I've written the API, the code to talk to this API already, so we can focus more on the UI stuff. So in general, what I was thinking we could do, if I sign in real quick, I can show the orders. This is basically the data model we'll be working with. So the orders have a reference number, the rev.com order number, a status, and a cost. And I think there's a couple of other properties we can get at. And then, I want to show those in a table. So it should offer pretty basic example for us to build something useful. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that's a very cool project to start with because it's kind of similar to what you think an iOS app should look like, just like a list of items, and you can act on those items. And so you've got the API client out of the way, and we can jump right into.
Yeah, so I have I have some files that we can drag in and add those to a separate framework and link it to the Mac app. But I figured we'd start with the Mac app portion of it first. And so I have a workspace, a blank workspace. I'm just going to do file new project. And if it's not clear by, my own experience, like I've done Mac apps before and I generally get the idea, but I get stuck a lot. Like where things are pretty obvious in UIKit because I've done that a lot. In AppKit, there's probably 10 ways of doing the same thing. And then sometimes I get caught up on, well, do Mac developers really do this? Or, bindings, for instance, come to mind. And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, because you have plenty of experience in this regard. And so I'd like you to just be my guide and sort of help me make the right decisions on making this app.
Awesome. Yeah, and I feel like you said the right thing because you're used to iOS development. And that's why for many people, macOS development looks weird because you're used to another thing that's different. And when you come to this new world of macOS development, it can be daunting at times. But for me, I did the opposite. I was familiar with macOS development, and then I moved to iOS. And for me, some things on iOS looked very weird because I wasn't used to them.
Yeah. Okay, so I I have this new project ready to go. I called it Transcribe Tool, and I'm going to use Swift. I'm going to use storyboards. I don't envision this being a document-based application, and I'm just going to skip the rest of these things for now. I think perhaps there's an idea for having some offline storage of these orders so you don't have to fetch them every time, but it's really only useful to me if I get the real status of the orders. So I think it's really just going to be like an online-only app.
Yeah, and even when I do use car data for an app, I never check that box because it does some things you don't necessarily want. So I just I just import everything manually and go from there. And I always like to start from as simple a template as possible without too much stuff in there.
Right. Okay, so we have a workspace, we have a Mac app, and I'm just going to run it so we see what we get. And we have a window, and we can move the window around. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. See you next time.
Okay, so this is a window. One interesting thing about Mac apps is you can have more than one window. That's pretty common. And if we look at what the template gave us, we have a storyboard that has a main menu. So this is where we would go through and add, different things. Most of these things I think we'd probably delete because they're not that useful for this app.
You have to be careful when deleting stuff and this is a common mistake for newcomers to the Mac. You sometimes will see there's this edit menu with formatting options and copy and paste and stuff, and I don't need any of this, so I just delete it. But if you do that, when the person is using like a text field in your app, they won't be able to
Command C and copy because it's bound to this menu item.
Because the menu item controls that. So I usually leave them alone until I have like the first version of what I would call the app done. And then I evaluate which items are not useful to the app. And they are usually the ones in the file menu. The other menus you usually don't touch.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll leave those alone for now. We're also given a window controller, and I'm noticing that somebody in the stream is asking to increase the resolution a bit. I think that's probably too dangerous a thing for me to do at this point.
I think they actually meant decrease because probably the stuff is too small. So
that's what I mean. Yeah. That's what I mean. Make it bigger. I will make the code as big as I can to make it easy to see, but the storyboard stuff is probably going to be small. Also, I'll point out that I am recording this, and I'll post the recording up to YouTube later. So if you want to go back and pause and look at what I've done, I'll try and call out the specifics that we're doing in Interface Builder, but the code should be easy enough to read. Okay, so the first thing we have is a window controller, and it looks like that's the storyboard entry point. So that's where we got our window. And then it gave us a view controller. So we have sort of a similar structure of view controllers that embed views. And the type of these things are NS window controller, NS view controller, and then NS view, right?
Yeah, so right now we already have like a big difference from iOS, which is the concept of a window controller. And you can think of a window controller as a kind of view controller, but it's specific to handle the window, because since we can have multiple windows on the Mac, it makes sense to have the separate object that controls the window and not have your view controller changing stuff on the window itself, although you can do that, but it's not a very good practice. So your window has to control like the size of the window, the contents of the window. Maybe you have buttons in the toolbar, which I think we will have, and your window controller will handle those. Okay. So that's why we have this separation between a window controller and a view controller, and they are related. In this case, the view controller is the content view controller for the window. So
so pretty much all the content. So what I was envisioning here is a table that listed all the orders, but then we need a button to create a new order and a button to load the orders or refresh them if the initial load failed. And you're saying those would go up here in the window controller.
Yeah, you'd probably use a toolbar for that. That's a design decision, but toolbars are very common.
Let's start with the table. I'm just going to search in here for table, and we've got a table view can drag that in here and set the constraints to sort of fill the whole screen.
And you can already see that the table view is also different because it has columns.
Yeah. Okay, so the first thing, maybe this would be order number, and then we would have the client ref number, and then let's see, to add new columns, is there...
You have to select the table view itself. It's under clip view.
Clip view.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so that's something you're going to notice a lot on Mac.
Is that because you have
especially
scrollable content that is being clipped by that guy?
Yeah, especially when dealing with views in Interface Builder, you're going to see that lots of views are actually composed of a view hierarchy that you have access to. That's very different from iOS, where a table view is a subclass of UI scroll view.
Okay, so I added 2 new columns here inside the table view. Do I get those like this?
Yeah, you have to resize the columns.
Got it. Okay. So then this could be the status, and then I think we have the price, and I think that's probably good for now.
Sounds good.
Okay. So yeah, let's run this and just see what it looks like. Cool.
Yeah, so now we have a table view and it has headers.
Yeah, okay, that's cool. All right, so in order to interact with this API, and I should also mention that Rev.com's API has 2 environments. There's a production environment where you submit real orders and pay real money, and then there's the sandbox environment, which is what I'm going to use today. The sandbox environment has a different set of credentials, and the orders are faked, essentially. You can submit orders, and it will create a fake order, and in like 10 minutes, it'll consider it complete and have some dummy attachments for you. So I would like to know, I need a way of putting those credentials in the app, and I also need to know somewhere in here which environment we're looking at. So I was thinking maybe a little status bar here at the bottom that says which environment we are at. So cool. You think we should just like move this up a little bit?
Yeah, do a little constant in there, and then you can add a label. Also, fun fact, labels on the Mac are just text fields, but they have different properties.
All right, so I think that, let's see, we want bottom space to container.
Another thing you could do was to add a separate view in there and center the label in that view. Yeah, but we don't have to do that now.
Probably a better idea rather than trying to figure out exactly what the centered text would look like. And then for the color, I want something that's...
I suggest using secondary label color.
Yeah, this is something on iOS, you almost never use this stuff. But I think it's a lot more important here because when you get into accessibility and stuff like that, these will be adjusted, right?
Yeah, and if we eventually want to use the vibrant dark appearance on the app, make like a dark mode app, we would want to have that label in there.
Okay, so I want something like that in there. And so if I run that, yeah, looks pretty good. It does look a little bit weird, right? At the bottom, because you have like rounded corners here, but not here.
Yeah, it's kind of empty. I think we could use the window border option. So if you select the window object, the window itself, that guy, you have, I think in the size inspector, there's a content border option.
This guy right here?
Yeah, and then you set it to manual.
So if I put the same... Oh, yeah, that looks way better.
Yeah. Creates a little chin.
So this thing is just going to be overlaid on top of that?
Yeah, that's just like a textured background for your window.
Okay. Interesting. All right, so let's see how that looks. Now, it does seem... I don't know if this is going to mess up the stream. It probably is, but there's like a little... 2-pixel double border there. So I think that maybe I should make this guy a little smaller.
Yeah, remove 1 point from that.
so that they overlap a little bit more. Yeah, that looks better.
Awesome.
Okay, so for me to interact with the API, I'm going to have some preferences to enter credentials. So would that be just creating another window controller over here?
Yeah, you can drag a window controller from the library. And now you'll have the same warning you get on iOS because you need to either give the window controller an identifier or make it a target for some segue.
Okay. Well, I know that there's preferences right here in like every Mac app. So I can just control drag here to
Yep.
that, right? And which one do we want here? Modal?
I think it could be modal or show.
What's the difference between those?
The difference is that a modal, you have to close it before you can use any other part of the
Oh,
app.
okay. All right, we'll try that, and if it gets annoying, then I'll turn it off.
Cool.
Okay, so now the benefit of this is because I've hooked it up to the menu item, and that menu item is hooked to Command comma, which is a shortcut that every Mac user should know. That Command comma opens up preferences in every single app. Well, if it's written like a Mac developer would. So the interaction there is the Command comma is linked to this menu item, and this menu item is linked to a segue. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. And then it becomes like the action of that menu item.
Okay, so then for the preferences window, we're going to have some like text fields and drop down for which environment we want active. So
Cool.
let me grab a couple of text fields. We'll make them secure text fields. This is one thing that when doing a Mac app, I really never know how to lay things out. On iOS, it's especially when you're designing for the iPhone, it's just so easy to
I
make
think
everything full width. And
I think preferences screens are the worst to design.
so, like,
I
just looking
never.
at Xcode's preferences. Well, this is probably a bad example because there's a million things, but like something like this, right, where they're sort of centered a
It's
little
kind
bit,
of
and
weird because they are right aligned but centered in the window.
yeah. So they have some sort of parent. Oops, they have some sort of parent view, right? Or this isn't even resizable.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
so
I would probably use a stack view.
stack view.
You can. I'll show you a trick. You don't have to drag. You can just select them.
Oh, okay. So like put these things in a vertical stack view.
Yeah, you
We should probably
select.
do this first, right? Like put
Yeah,
the
so there's a little button at the bottom that's embed in stack view, but you should probably first embed each pair in a stack view so they become a
yeah.
horizontal stack view, and then you select all stack views and group them using a vertical one.
Okay. Looks like we need one other control, which is the what do you call the drop downs? I always forget what they're
Pop-up,
called. Pop up.
pop-up menu.
So then these guys go into stack view, and then all of these go into vertical stack view. Okay.
Yeah.
So this would be the credentials that we're going to be working with are the user key and the client key. And then this is the sandbox user key and the sandbox client key. And this is going to be which environment we have configured. Okay, so that looks spectacularly bad at this point. So should I give
Yeah,
all of these things an equal width constraint, each label?
yeah, either the labels or the text fields, or you can mess with the stack view alignment. I honestly, I never really know how to deal with them. I just try stuff and see what works.
Okay,
Yeah, the
so this
width
seems to
seems
be
like
working
it's
okay.
working. Yeah.
Equal widths.
And then
Yeah,
you can align the text on the labels to the left,
let's do
to the right,
center
sorry.
this guy. And then grab all of the labels. It doesn't want me to shift click any of these things. There it goes. And then, so I'm picking the wrong thing. I'm picking the stack view, right? So which of these things do I want? This one?
You want the label.
I can't tell which is which here.
It's the one with the little control icon, the top one.
That one. Okay.
Yeah.
So I want that one. Oops, sorry. That one, this one, this one, this one. Is that right?
I think you have some text fields selected.
Oh,
I
you're
see.
Right. Yeah, that one. And that one, sorry.
Secure text field.
Okay, so we'll right align that. And then on the outer stack view, we can perhaps make it wider or just make these wider.
Yeah, you can set a width constraint on the stack view itself or the text fields.
All right, so we'll give this a width of 400. And at that point, then, since each one of these have a width constraint already, this one, I would expect it to have filled this stack view. So we need this stack view to alignment, distribution. Is that right?
I think you can add a trailing constraint if you want. I've done that before.
Trailing space to container?
Yeah. And then you set it to 0 afterwards.
Sorry, on the text field.
The stack view.
Sorry.
Yeah. There are so many views.
Yeah. Okay. So this stack view, we're going to have this one trailing constraint to this stack view.
Yeah.
Or
probably.
to the container. Let's try this one. Trailing space to container. Then change that to 0. Okay. Yeah, that makes more sense. Sorry, that was a little bit confusing. Okay.
And
so then
Stephen on the chat is pointing out that NS Grid View is perfect for this kind of thing.
Okay.
I'm not familiar with NS Grid View. I think it's new it launched on Sierra and it was kind of buggy on Interface Builder, so I never really used it.
Cool. I will definitely check out NS Grid View.
Yeah,
for
there's
this
another control another view that would help with
All right,
this.
So I'm going to do trailing space to container. No, on the stack view.
So we're basically replicating what Xcode does.
You mean for the layout of these fields? Okay. So I'm just going to run this and make sure that I can open up preferences and we can see it. So I hit Command comma, boom, comes up. Can't do anything until I close it, which is pretty good. And I can also do it from the preferences menu.
Yeah.
Awesome. And when you type, because I use the secure text entry, that looks pretty good. Okay.
Yeah. You should probably set the environment text label to the right as well, align to the right. And also set a title on the... You can set it on the window or on the view controller itself as well.
Okay, so whichever view controller is the content view, the window will inherit
they bind the title from the view controller.
Okay. So then to get these things to say production and sandbox, let's see.
The pop-up button has a menu inside.
Okay.
And so that's where you set.
Okay. So at this point, I know these are credentials and they probably don't belong in NS user defaults, but that seems to be like a really easy thing to show off. Ideally, they would go in the keychain, when we save them, but I don't have a library loaded to put them in the keychain. So I wonder if we should just put a big caveat. You shouldn't put credentials in NS user defaults, but do it
Yeah,
anyway.
this is tutorial code, people. So we are going to do something really bad, which you
Yeah.
should never do in production code. But dealing with the keychain for a tutorial like this would be kind of a pain.
Yeah.
So let's use user defaults, but you shouldn't.
Okay. So, and I'm just going to ignore these two for now. Honestly, I'm just going to bind these two
Yeah,
because
we're
those are
going
the only
to
two we're
use
going to
the
use.
sandbox.
Okay, so I'm going to go over to this bindings menu, which is something that people from iOS probably aren't familiar with. And I have a super love-hate relationship with these things. They work really well in demo apps, especially like preference panes and stuff. But every time I run into a brick wall, I ask people for advice, and many times, most people say they don't use bindings, except for simple things like this. So, yeah, the downsides of them, they're kind of magical, and they let you wire things up just here in Interface Builder, but there's nowhere for you to like set a breakpoint and see, what's happening. And, if you need to customize it, it gets pretty hairy pretty quick. So,
Yeah, so what I always tell people is if you're doing like a setting screen, something simple, and you can use bindings, by all means, go ahead and use them. But as soon as you start having problems, just do everything in code.
yeah.
I do my interfaces in code, so I don't really use bindings anymore. But I have used them on the past in shipping apps, and they can be pretty useful.
Okay, so here I'm going to bind the value of this to this shared user defaults controller, and I'm going to give it's the model key path that I give it the name of the key.
I'm not sure, to be honest.
All right, we're going to try it, and if it breaks, then okay, we'll do the same thing for this one.
We should probably explain what bindings are to people who are watching. So bindings are a way for you to connect interface items with your models using Interface Builder. And this is not available for iOS. It's a Mac thing. And what we are doing now is we are binding the content of the text field to the user defaults key. So if we edit the contents of the text field, it's going to change the user defaults. And if the user defaults change, it's going to change the text field.
So in this case, I can actually bind this one with a pattern, right? So if I want to bind that to be the same thing as the environment, and then on the display pattern, I can say environment : like that. I think that will work. So
Yeah,
that way,
that
when I
should work.
switch it in the preferences, the one on the table will change. Now we don't have a value already, so is this where I need to like register my defaults at app launch?
Yeah, probably. You should probably have a default
Okay.
environment.
And it doesn't seem to be working on the label. So maybe...
Did you bind the pop-up?
Yeah, I did. I did selected value.
Interesting.
Also possible that this isn't working at all. So let me if we type something and hit enter, then it should have saved it. And if we open it up again, it's still there. So it is being stored somewhere. For the label, bind to the user defaults controller, environment. We have a display pattern.
Let me see the binding for the pop-up menu again. Does it use the title from the menu item?
Yeah, I
I'm
didn't
not
give it a
sure.
value, did I? On each one of these, it just has a title. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think? we could always read it in code, but
Yeah,
the real thing is I need to
honestly,
know.
I don't remember ever using bindings with pop-up menus, so this
Okay.
is new territory for me.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll tell you what. I'm just going to move forward and assume the environment sandbox for now, because I don't want to get caught up on an issue like this when we could move on to other things.
We can always come back to it later.
But I do think that it's in the app delegate, we do need to register our defaults.
Yeah, definitely.
Should make sure that everybody can see that.
So this is the same as you do on iOS when you have user defaults and you want to have default values.
And so these only get applied if they don't already have a value, right?
Yeah. We should ask if people are able to read the code.
Yeah. Give us a thumbs up in the chat if you can read the code, or if you want me to increase it, let me know. Okay, so we register our defaults environment there. Now on our view controller, right, we need some way of loading the data, but when you first launch the app, you're not going to have credentials, so we need some way of saying, hey, you need to open credentials here. So do you think we should put that in the toolbar? Right,
Like,
we talked about having a in the storyboard in our window controller, we were going to have a toolbar, right?
Yeah, sure. Let's add a toolbar.
All right. Sounds
And
like
that's going to have like a button to load the orders and maybe add a new order in the future when that is implemented.
Okay, so these types of things like throw me off because it looks like it's broken, but I guess that's just how it looks in storyboards.
Yeah, that's just interface builder. And you can remove the default items and delete them from the allowed toolbar items.
Okay.
Just leave the spaces.
Okay, so then we want to put a button in here. And this is another interesting thing that is different from iOS, is that we actually have a control library here. And it makes it sort of hard to know what am I supposed to put in the toolbar. If you know, obviously there's some pretty
you
good...
have to check the human interface guidelines for this stuff, but basically the button you use in toolbars is the textured rounded button.
This guy.
Yeah. Okay. That's the one that looks...
It tells you.
Yeah, it looks good in the toolbar.
Okay, so this guy is going to be load orders, right?
And also, let me explain. You can't drag the button to that bottom area, the default toolbar, because right now what you're doing is you're creating the template for your toolbar items, because toolbars can be customized, in theory at least. We are not going to support that.
Right.
So you can have tons of different items that the user can choose from. And that's why you first create your template items and then you create your default toolbar.
Okay, so because I gave these text in the button, you could also give it an icon and have the text underneath, and then I think you can control like how it shows.
Yeah, the toolbar items have labels and palette labels. The label is the one that's going to show if the toolbar is set to show the labels.
Got it.
And the palette one is the one that's going to show when the user goes to customize the toolbar. None of these will be supported.
Got it.
For now. So you should select the toolbar object itself and set it to display the icon only. The icon in this case is the button, and you should also uncheck customizable because we're not supporting that.
So if they double click on it, we don't want to open up that designer panel.
Yeah.
Okay, so another thing we're going to need is some sort of loading indicator, and I noticed that there's no activity indicator, but there is a progress indicator, and it looks like we have multiple to choose from here as well.
Yeah.
So
this is also a common theme with Mac development. So many controls have completely different looks. So the button itself, when you typed button in there, you saw how many different types of button you can have.
Yeah.
And even like radio buttons and checkboxes are the same class, which is NS button. So they are just buttons.
So it's just a way of configuring them.
Yeah,
here.
They have many properties you can customize.
It would be kind of cool if that was on iOS or in general, and if Xcode allowed you to create your own custom palette of controls that could come from wherever, and you just drag them in like that. That would be cool.
Yeah. It used to be a thing with interface builder plugins, but they killed that.
Okay, so in my view controller here, I'm going to have to know whether or not we have. Let's see. Let me think about this for a sec. I need to know whether or not we have credentials, and if we don't have credentials, I want to open preferences. So, do we want to just open them on load if we don't have credentials?
Yeah, I think that's
So
a
could we
good
do
idea.
something like this where I just drag from the view controller to preferences so that I have a segue I can use?
Yes, you can. There's also another way. If I think there's like a standard order front preferences window or something in NS application. I
Okay.
think so. I never tried it, but that segue is going to work as well.
Okay, so I'm going to write a function here. Private func has credentials. This will return a bool. And has credentials will check user defaults. And we'd say defaults, string for key, sandbox user key. And then client key. And if we don't have either of those, we'll return false. Then we'll return true. I will have to do the same exact thing. I almost want to make a struct here called rev credentials real quick, because I want to be able to get these pretty easily. So rev credentials here will have a user key.
Yeah, I usually encapsulate that sort of stuff in like a preferences struct or something.
Yeah, me
That's a
too.
good
Yeah.
approach.
So that way I can have a var credentials, which is lazy, not lazy, but computed. And then we can move this stuff into there. And this guy would return rev credentials like that. And so now this guy would just return credentials not equal nil.
You forgot the return in there.
I've been doing too much Ruby. This is going to return nil.
Yeah, that's an aspect of Ruby I actually like.
Okay, so I'm curious, what is this represented object? Is that something I need?
Well, you see, they thought about, well, view controllers are used to present some sort of model. So they call it represented object. It's a property on NS view controller. And in the old Object-C days, that would be just an ID and you'd cast it or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But with in the Swift world, you're probably not gonna want to use that. So you can actually just delete the override there and ignore it.
Because I want to work with typed stuff. I don't want to work with any.
Yeah.
Okay, it looks like I need this to be a storyboard dot identifier. Is that what it wanted?
Yeah. What they wanted to do is to extend storyboard.identifier and add a static let. So you can just put like dot preferences in there.
Yeah, it's similar to notifications, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's used a lot on Mac development. I don't know why they are not using that for iOS as well. Trying to go get away from stringly typed APIs.
Yeah. Okay, so here I'm going to change this to say if we have credentials, we're going to load something. Otherwise, we're going to perform that segue. So this should automatically open up the... Oh yeah, and I need to make that method. and should have opened that up yet already. So I wonder if these are empty.
Yeah, maybe they are empty.
Let's see. Guard let user key. Is this where you say where? Or is that old Swift?
I would just
User key dot. Let me just do another guard.
yeah. You can chain actually. You can do like comma user key dot is empty, I think.
Yeah. Here, right? Not user key. Yeah,
Not
I'll do
user
that.
key dot empty.
I'll do that here.
And you forgot a comma on the previous is empty.
All right. That's a little bit weird.
Yeah, you can indent that, I think. I don't know.
That's probably better. I've talked to people who are like only one clause per guard, but then you would have to capture your return here. So I don't know.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm not actually sure if that was the problem, but let's just double check. Okay. Now we're here. And
You should probably do that in view did appear. I think on view did load, the environment is not ready to present a model.
right. Okay. So this seems like it would be problematic though, because like every time it gets focus, it's going to do the same thing, right? So if I go back here and back here, does it load view did appear again? Or just like
No.
if you minimize?
View did appear is called if you minimize the window and then you expand it again, then it's going to be called.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay.
you maybe you should add like a check to make sure you only do it at most once or
Yeah.
something. In real life, that would probably go in a coordinator of some sort. So
Right.
we're
Okay.
just hacking a sample app here. But yeah, you should probably avoid doing that.
Oops. Has checked preferences. I'll do a guard here. Guard. There. Okay.
And you
So-
need to set that to true afterwards.
So we have a comment from the chat that says, neat trick for view did appear is being presented or is moving to parent controller. So probably some built-in state we could piggyback on to make sure that we only do that once. Okay, neat. Okay, so at this point now, if I have credentials, then I need to load the orders. So if I just fudge something in there, I think the point here is that this button would be disabled if we have no credentials, and we would need to know when credentials changed also, right?
Yeah.
So should this is where I get into like bindings of like I need to know when any of those keys change so I can check my credentials Boolean. Alternatively, have some sort of preferences object that raises notifications when things are set.
Mm-hmm. I think you can. I think you can observe the user defaults.
Like key value observing or notifications?
Yeah, I think you can do KVO as well, but it does have, I think, a like user defaults did change or something.
So user defaults notification. Did change notification. That's good. Okay. So we will on notification center defaults add observer.
I think you should be doing this on the window controller actually, because you are not going to be able to access that button from the view controller.
Okay. So let's move over to create a.
You have to create. So just so people know, we have the toolbar on the window, and the window is controlled by the window controller. So if you want to mess around with the toolbar, we should do it in a custom subclass of window controller, because we could actually do it in the view controller somehow, but it would be very hacky. So let's do a subclass of NS window controller.
All right. And in our main storyboard, we will set the identity of this guy to orderless window controller. And I'm going to rename this guy as well, orderless view controller.
I see you're not using the
No, it's
built-in
buggy.
refactor.
It's
That's
buggy.
very clever.
I can do it faster and more reliably myself.
Very clever. Yeah, I have a problem where it renames everything, and then it renames the file in the little outline view, but it doesn't
not
update
the file on disk.
disk.
Yeah, I have a radar from that from like a year ago, and it's still not fixed.
That's very typical.
Okay. Where was I? Okay, so this guy is set. This guy is set. So now we need some outlets to these guys, right? So if I switch this to that guy, we can have an outlet
You need
to the
to
button,
actually,
right?
yeah, you need to actually open the toolbar editor.
Oh, do it from here.
And make sure you select the button itself.
This
there
guy.
you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because there's a text field inside of it, right?
Yeah. So
Okay.
the hierarchy is you have the window controller, the window, the toolbar item, and then you have the button. So that's why I always recommend people use the outline view in Interface Builder, because then you make sure you're selecting the right thing.
Yeah. Okay, loading indicator. On this loading indicator, I need that to be unchecked display when stopped. And then new order button, I'm just going to ignore that for now, because I don't think we'll have enough time to get to that. Okay, so we have our stuff here. So this guy needs to check the notification. So here, is this like window did load? Like that?
Yep.
Okay, so on our
So this is equivalent to view did load in a view controller. So when view did load is called, it's safe for you to access your outlets and stuff.
User defaults changed. So here, let me just switch over to full screen. So we're going to add self. The selector is user defaults changed. The name is dot, not dot. This is user defaults did change notification.
Yep.
Nil. And is this just like scoped to my domain or my application?
I think that's specific to your standard domain, so your application domain.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
it's
here,
not going to get called for like system preferences changed or something.
Okay, so now in the check for preferences, I'm going to have to move this somewhere else.
Yeah, you could probably have a static method or property on Rev credentials that returns the like current credentials.
Yeah, let's do that.
You can extract the implementation from the view controller.
Static var, I'll make it a func, current. No, static var, current.
That's more Swifty.
Yeah. And this is optional. Then we'll grab all this stuff. Put it there.
And then you have to change the implementation in view controller.
So credentials, this is now going to be rev credentials.current is nil. And again, for those of you who joined later, after the
Yeah.
caveat, don't ever put credentials in user defaults.
Yeah,
I have to
please
say it
don't.
many times.
This is just a sample code thing, so please do not use keychain, and there are helpers for that.
So we want to check the isEnabled property to see if our rev credentials.current is not equal to nil.
Sounds good.
Okay. So the way I can test this is, and I'm going to have to do this on window did load also. But if I get rid of that, notice that the value there switches. Sweet. That works.
Cool. Very reactive.
All right. So now we need to have this button actually do stuff to kick off a load and show some stuff in the table.
Yeah. So now we get to a point where many people get confused on when doing Mac development, which is, okay, so I have this button and it's on my Windows toolbar. So how do I make that button call something on my view controller? Because the view controller is going to have the load orders thing.
All right. So now we'll make sure that that happens right away. So when you click on the button, we're going to have this guy. This would essentially be like an IB action, right?
Yeah.
And we want to call that from the window controller. And the window controller doesn't necessarily know that its content view is an order list view controller, right?
Yeah. So you could like add an action to the window controller itself, and then from the window controller, get your Windows content view controller, cast it to a order list view controller, and then call the load orders. But there's a better way. You see, both the window controller and the view controller, they are part of the responder chain.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of like dragging the action from load orders to a specific object, you can drag it to the first responder object.
This guy.
Yeah, so you have to do it from the button. That problem again.
Yeah, you're right.
So you drag to the first responder, and you should find load orders in there somewhere.
It's alphabetical. Load orders. Check it out.
There you go.
Okay, so just to reiterate and to make sure that I know how this is happening, you have a, let's see, let me go back over to code real quick. So you have a window controller, and that's going to dispatch some event onto the responder chain, right?
Yeah.
And so the responder chain is going to find, is that the innermost... you mentioned that like there's like a tree, right? So
yeah, you can imagine it like a tree. So
there's Windows views and view controllers, and there's also all the nested stuff underneath each one of these, right?
Yeah, actually the view controller comes before the view. But the trick is that when you dispatch an action to the responder chain, it's going to start from the first responder, which could be like a text field on your view.
Right. So if it has focus, right?
Yeah, and then it's going to go back and traverse this tree in reverse and find the first object that responds to the selector you posted until it reaches the application itself. Right. And when it reaches the application itself, if it reaches the application itself and it's not something that application implements, then it's going to crash because no response.
So if we had some sort of nested view here that had a text field and this had focus, then then the window control is dispatching an event to first responder. It's going to find the text field. The text field doesn't know what that action is, so it's going to bubble up to its parent view and its parent view, et cetera, until that parent view has a view controller. Then it sidesteps to the view controller hierarchy. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then if there are no view controllers that handle it, then it'll go to the window.
Yeah.
And then if the window doesn't handle it, then the window controller. Mm-hmm. Got it. Okay. So we're basically intercepting that out of midair at the view controller level. Okay.
And if you wanted to do that in code, you would use NS application, a shared application. I think it's send action. You can use NS app, which is a shortcut if you
Okay.
want.
Send action. Okay.
Send action. Yeah, and then you type the selector, and to you leave as nil, and from you put the sender, which can be anything. So
Okay.
when you send an action to nil, it's going to traverse the
The first
responder chain.
responders. Okay. Yeah, that's really cool. Responder chain, definitely, this stuff exists on iOS, but people don't use it very much on iOS.
Yeah. Yeah, I think because on iOS you usually have a more defined hierarchy, and you
Right.
can usually just like do the action directly. But on the Mac, since you have menus and window controllers and stuff, you end up having to use the responder chain.
Right. Okay. Okay. So we click load orders. It's going to go over here and click load orders. And we actually have to load some orders at some point. So I'm going to go over to my workspace over here, and we're going to add a new project. And I'm going to choose Mac OS Cocoa Framework. I'm going to call this RevKit.
Very creative.
I already have a folder with the code in it, but I'm going to put it right in here. And then I'm going to add it to my existing workspace.
Cool.
Wait a second.
Ooh, that's
Make
tricky.
sure I don't overwrite my code that I have.
Yeah, so you have a folder named RevKit already, so it will try to override it.
I think I had it in the right folder. I just need to go into here. There we go.
When you
it wanted
select,
to move it.
yeah, the workspace Xcode changing files for you always.
Yeah, I'll do what Xcode wants. Let me just move the folder out of the way. I can do that right here. Okay. So then RevKit here, choose that first, and now it'll put it alongside that.
Cool. So now we have a framework.
And let me just plop the code in there from here. This code is not particularly well written. It was written in a rush, and is not that interesting either. But basically, we're going to get back orders.
Yeah, so you can imagine if you're like working on an iOS app and you want to make a Mac version, you could probably do something like that. You pick your model and networking code and stuff and just create a Mac framework out of it.
So here I'm going to add under linked binaries and frameworks and libraries, I'm going to add that framework, which will set it up as a build dependency. So when I build transcribe tool, it will build the RevKit, right?
You should probably remove it from linked and just add it to the embedded binaries.
Okay.
Then it does everything for you. Yeah, so when you add it as an embedded binary, it actually adds it as a dependency, and then it actually like links and copies the framework and does all that good stuff.
For some reason, on Mac, it looks like IB actions have to have an argument, which is not true on iOS. So that means that this is now broken.
Is it though?
Yeah, because the selector's changed, right?
Ooh.
So if we go to the connections here, yeah, it's the wrong load orders method that would have crashed.
It's weird that it allowed you to actually hook it up on the first place.
Yeah. Now it has a colon. I don't know. This is going to be really hard for the live streams people to see, but it has a colon indicating has got an argument now. Okay, so I'm going to build that. And now in our order list view controller, I want to have a rev client, which I need to import RevKit at the top. And for the client key, let's get the credentials.
And this is an instance where I would actually fatal error if I don't have credentials. Because you
Yeah,
shouldn't
because it's
be
a
able.
workflow. Yeah, you should never be
Yeah,
able to click the button.
yeah.
I'll do that. Okay, so user key credentials dot, I'd put that backwards. Client key here, user key here. The environment, I'm going to use sandbox for now. Okay, client.fetch orders, or I think I called it get all orders. And actually, that is incorrect. I think I have the wrong data on the client here. Submit order, get all orders. Yeah, oops. I have a different, I think I grabbed the wrong copy of that code.
You're using the wrong code.
Yeah, this is it. So let me, that's not going to work. Let me delete this guy
Yeah, that's a good idea.
and then drag in the right one. Okay,
Cool.
back to our order list view controller. Get all orders. Yeah, so the result is a paged orders type.
Cool.
Results. And here we can say switch results. If we got a success, then there's a page of orders in here. And if we failed, there's an error.
Well, there's a trick which I'm not sure if you know it, but NS application actually has I think it's a present error or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you
So
can
as long as you
actually.
specify like the failure recovery suggestion and the failure reason in the user info of your NS error, then it should give you a somewhat useful error message.
Yeah, and also I'm pretty sure it also uses the responder chain. So if you, let's say, implement present error on your view controller, you can actually customize
Okay.
the error presentation. So it's
Nice.
a very handy method.
Okay, so I need to show that loading spinner and disable the button. But I don't own those things. So I was thinking that I would just have some sort of property is loading. And then maybe could I make that dynamic so we could bind to it?
Cool.
And then here I could say is loading is true. And then here is self.isLoading equals false. Would that work?
Yeah, there's just one caveat, which is the is loading would be on the window controller.
So I would need to move this to the window controller so we could bind
Yeah.
those elements to it and then talk to the window controller's is loading property from my view
Yeah.
controller. Okay.
Yeah, you can access your window controller from the view controller.
So that
We can add a computed property.
because I need it to be my type, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this would let's make it implicitly unwrapped optional. So this would return the views Windows
Window
controller as order list window controller.
And you could probably, if you wanted to make this a little cleaner, you could probably make like a generic view controller class that has a companion window controller class.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
But
so here we're going to say window controller dot is loading. True there. Self dot window controller dot is loading there.
Just something that's important for people to know. If we call load orders before view did appear, it's going to crash.
Because this that won't exist, right?
Yeah, view.window is only set after the first point in the execution when you actually have the window is in view did appear.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I'm fine with that crashing for now. All right. So then I just need to do the binding.
Mm-hmm. So
Storyboard.
just a recap for our people that are watching, we made a property on the window controller that says whether it's loading. And then we are setting that property from the view controller. And since we made the property dynamic and accessible to Object-C, we can bind our UI to that property. And it's going to automatically update the loading indicator.
So here we're going to bind to the window controller.
Yeah.
And the controller key, or sorry, the model key path is loading. And I had to make sure to make that at OBJC and dynamic for bindings to work.
Yeah, the same thing you would do to make it KVO compliant.
Mm-hmm. So another cool thing I can do here is I can disable the load orders button while it's loading because I don't want you to click it twice. So the enabled property of our button can also bind to the is loading property of our window controller, but here I want to negate it, right?
Yeah, value transformer, I think, is the one you want.
NS negate Boolean, so that it is not enabled when it is loading.
Yeah, and those value transformers, I'm pretty sure you can actually create your own if you need to.
So I created my own because I was like trying to go full bore into bindings. I created my own for my side mirror app, but it didn't show up in that list, and so I ended up having to use it in code anyway. And I don't know, I left that whole process with very mixed feelings about bindings.
Yeah, like we mentioned before, if bindings start to break, just go full on code because they are not designed to be very customizable, I guess.
Okay, so load our app again. It says it's running. I don't know if I believe it. Let me just run it again. Okay, so it's loading. This didn't work, and also the I ran into this problem, and I seriously sat there staring at it for like an hour. You want to reveal what's wrong here?
So here's the thing. If you look on the project files, you see there's an entitlements file in there, because when you make a Mac app, it's going to enable the app sandbox by default, and Mac apps that are sandboxed by default, they don't have access to the network at all.
So we need to go to capabilities.
Enable that entitlement. Yeah.
So
incoming connections. I'm sorry.
No, we want outgoing.
Yeah. So
and that just turned everything off for some reason. Okay, got it. And then also file access. I will need read-only permission to files that I drag in. Read and write to the downloads folder, so I can download the attachments. Probably something like that.
Yeah.
Now, if I drag and drop a file out of my Mac app and onto the desktop, will I need to add read-write here as well?
I'm not sure, to be honest.
I think that'll work. Okay.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, sandboxing is kind of annoying. My app side mirror has a feature that doesn't work. It silently doesn't work under sandboxing, where the app in general, well, I can launch it and show it to you. The app right here is going to show me what exists on the other screen. So like right now, you can see like the stream window and everything. And so the idea here is that I can be giving a demo, but I can keep this on my screen, right? So I can see what's going on the other monitor, which is probably a projector and which is probably behind you, right? So that's what this app is all about. But cool. I want to be able to click in the Mac app here and teleport that click over to the other monitor. So I got it all working, but it uses CG dispatch event, which silently does nothing if you're sandboxed. So I didn't know that until I submitted it to the store.
Control the entire computer.
Yeah, and there's no entitlement for that.
Yeah.
So
that's a shame.
Yeah, it was really annoying. I think the next version of Side Mirror will probably not be in the Mac App Store for that reason.
Yeah, and that, folks, is why so many apps are not in the Mac App Store.
Yeah. Okay. I did notice an issue with the binding for the load orders button. Bind to isLoading negate. That's the enabled property, but it was
Yeah, that's interesting.
yeah.
Yeah,
I'm not sure
that
what's going on there.
that error in there is always in there.
Okay, so I have invalid credentials, which is probably what's happening here. So
Yeah,
I'm going to
you're
paste
getting a
in my
401.
correct credentials. This is the sandbox client key. And the sandbox user key. Okay, so I will do that. Click load orders again. This time it worked, so I'm not quite sure what happened. Okay, so we loaded 2 orders. Sweet.
Nice.
Okay, so how do we get those orders listed in the table?
Well, we can use bindings or we can use code.
What would you do?
I would probably start with bindings and move to codes
Okay.
if they don't do what I want.
Okay, so is this something where we need to use like array controller?
Yeah, probably.
So is that something I need to drag in here?
Yeah, so we are going to create an object that's called an array controller. And as the name implies, it controls an array of stuff. And the array controller is used to bind the content of a backing array to the table view.
So do I need an outlet to this from my order list view controller so I
Yeah,
can talk to it?
because you want to set the stuff
So
in there.
I'll call it orders array controller. Okay.
And if you use like class dump on any Mac app by Apple, you're going to see lots of array controllers. They use that stuff a lot.
We're getting shouted at to do this in code. Do you want? I mean, I don't know how hard this is going to be because I haven't worked with NS table view before.
Not very
but
hard. Let's do it in code. So
okay,
people
we'll do it in code, and maybe I'll do an
code.
extension to this in the future that uses array controller, because I feel like array controller looks good and works really well for a demo, but the moment you sort of step outside the bounds of that, it is kind of frustrating. But that's just my sort of naive approach to this topic. But I like code because I can set a breakpoint on it. We can do a diff.
Awesome.
You get a real commit, that sort of thing.
So I think we should start by adding identifiers to the table view columns and rows.
Okay.
I mean cells. So you should select, you can expand the clip view, table view, and then each column will have its identifier. It's in the one before this one. Yeah, identity.
So this will be order, number, column, something like that?
Yeah, I would call it just order number and use the same identifier for the cell.
So
because we
click
do need
into
the
it
cell.
and then order number here.
Yeah, use the same one because it's easier.
Okay, is there a better way to
use the outline view?
Okay.
Yeah.
So client ref, and we'll do the same for the cell. This is the cell view, right? Not the...
Yeah, so you have the column, which is not a view, it's just a object, and then you have the table cell view, and then you have the text field, which is a label.
Okay. So I'm in the right thing right here for client ref. Then status, price, okay.
Cool. And we need an outlet for our table view. That's the scroll view.
This guy.
Yeah.
Okay. So now back to code.
Okay, so now we need to set ourselves as the data source and delegate for the table view.
Sorry, we got a question in the chat. Mike, oh yeah, it was already answered. Okay, yeah. So our special guest today is Guy Rambo. All right. I'm sorry, what were you saying? Right here in the success where we have our orders, we need to...
Well, I think on view did load, you should set ourselves as the delegate and data source for the table view. We could do that in interface builder as well, but doing
That's fine
in
here.
code.
And then maybe an extension on order list view controller. So is this the same type of thing? NS table view delegate?
Yeah.
And
I'm not sure we're going to use the delegates. Leave it in there just in case.
okay.
So you have number of rows.
Okay, so we need to have our paged orders response.
Yeah,
I'm just going to convert that to an array of orders, which will be nil. And then...
maybe start with an empty one.
So I think that this indicates some valid state that you've never fetched it, rather than you fetched it and it was empty. Because it's pretty easy for me to just say return orders dot count or 0.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
And does your get all orders method call the completion on the main queue already?
Yes, it does.
Cool.
So here we should say orders equals paged orders dot orders. And then, if you have a lot of orders, then maybe I could support, infinite scrolling, fetching the next page, that sort of thing. But for now, it's fine. So do I need to tell the table view to reload data?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So that's should be very familiar for iOS developers.
Yeah.
And now you need to implement a view for table column.
That guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is a little different from what people are used to on iOS. The table view is asking for a view for a table column and a row. So because we have columns and rows, we have to check which column we are being asked for and then which row inside that column. So the column is going to define the property
but we're
from
still,
our model, and
we're still returning, lowercase c cells, right? An individual row and column intersection.
Yeah, you're returning that little square thing, rectangular thing that shows up inside the column and that particular row. So, and there's a concept on the Mac which we're not gonna get into, which is the concept of a row view, which is the entire area, including all columns. If you want to customize the selection in some way, you're going to be using row views, but we're going to be using just the cells today.
Okay. So now how do I know which column it is? This table column, it's nullable, or it's optional, so...
Yeah, you should probably let the table column dot identifier. And if you don't get an identifier, you just return nil.
Okay. So then I can switch on the column identifier.
Yeah, and you see that's an NS user interface identifier, the type for the column identifier. Yeah,
I hate this. If you have a compile error in Swift, it just refuses to give you any useful information.
Yeah.
Still, okay. Hang on, return nil. Now, in iOS, it'll crash if you ever return nil from this, but this is okay for us to return nil?
Yeah, in case... it should never happen. We could probably just crash in that instance because we shouldn't have a column that doesn't have an identifier, and the column should be there. But in case you return nil, it's just going to have an empty thing in there.
Okay, so it's got a raw value of a string. So we're good there. Okay, so let's just look at the order number, and then we can try and get that working. So if it's order number, then And in the other case, we will return nil, which means we can get rid of that. So what do we need to return here?
You can ask the table view to make a view for you. Make view, yeah, and then you pass the same name because
Okay,
we
so
use the
this is
same
where
name.
I was going to call it column, and you were saying just make them the same.
Yeah, you could use
Okay.
just the same identifier in there,
Okay.
but
And for
and
the
the
owner,
owner you can just put the table view itself in there. I'm not really sure what that does. Yeah, you have to. You can use a column identifier in
yeah.
there, I think, because it's the same type.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So I
Oh, wait, hang
think
on. Sorry. So this is going to be...
I think it returns a NS view.
Goodness gracious, Xcode.
Awesome. Try the method maybe.
There.
Yeah, it returns an NS view and it's nullable. And we should probably cast it to an NS table cell view.
Okay.
Because that's what we have on our storyboard. And
Yeah.
then you can ask it for its I think it's text field something. Yeah, text
Okay.
field. And then you set the string value on
String
the
value.
text.
Yeah, that's one thing I always have to look up. I
Yeah.
always forget. Okay, so
Yeah,
at this point,
so
I need to get the order for this row, which is
yeah.
going to come from orders at row, and we can guard on that one. Okay, so then here we'll say order dot order number. Is that it?
I think that should work. Let's try it.
Hey, check that out.
Awesome.
Okay, let's grab a client ref and a couple of others real quick to wrap up this example.
Yeah. And of course, this code is a little messy at the moment,
Right.
but this is just an example. In you could probably create like a helper on your model that's going to return the correct field for the column and stuff to make this a lot more clean. But we don't have time for that. And of course, we could be using a custom NS table view cell, NS table cell view subclass if you wanted to customize some aspect of the table view cell. And if people want to see an example of that, they could look at my WWDC for Mac app, which has custom cells.
Okay, and that's open source, right?
Yep.
Okay, so at this point we have a price, but it's not a string. So
we should use a number formatter.
In code here, or do you do that in Interface Builder?
You can add a formatter to a text field, but since we're here.
And let's see, number style, currency. String from NS number. And I think we have a decimal.
I think the formatter has a method that can use a decimal. I'm pretty sure it does. I think it's string for. Yeah, I think it's that one.
Okay, we'll try it. Order.price.
The documentation says that it raises an exception. That's not very reassuring.
Okay, now this formatter needs to not go here because there's no reason to create 100 of these. So I'll just create a...
Yeah, we can't use just string describing something here because it is a currency value, so we should format it properly. That's classic.
Oops, number formatter. All right. Yeah, sorry. Okay, so now we have a number formatter with a currency style, and we use that down here. Yeah,
And
this could totally be cleaned up.
we mentioned using the number formatter from Interface Builder. On iOS, I don't think this is possible, but on the Mac, you can actually add a number formatter to a text field or a label.
Check that out. That's cool.
Awesome.
And then
we have a Mac app.
Yeah, we have a Mac app. So now, if we wanted to double click to be able to open up that order and to see the attachments, then I would create a separate window controller for that with a view controller inside of it. And then when you click on this, it would, the table view delegate method would be called, and then we would know which order it was that you clicked on, that sort of thing.
It's not as easy as on iOS because the most common action to be done on a table view like this is double clicking, and there is no like delegate method did double click row at index path or something.
Really? Okay. I would expect that to be sort of built in.
Yeah, no, it is not that difficult. You need to set a target on the table view, so it would be self. Do you want to do that real quick so we can show people how it's done?
Yeah, let's just create a blank window.
Don't have to actually open. Yeah, you can create a window. Create a window controller. And then you're going to create a segue from the view controller and name it.
So this would be just show.
Yeah.
And then that guy would be show order segue.
Cool.
All right. And then implement the delegate method on our...
The rest is all in code. So it's not a delegate method. If you go back to the view did load method, so we're going to set the table view's target property to be ourselves. And then you're going to set the double action property on table view.
Okay.
This is kind of funny because it's so specific. You have action and then you have double action, which is when you double click.
So something like and does that give me a sender, which is the table view?
Yeah, the sender is going to be the table view, but you can just use our table view.
Yeah.
And then you can ask the table view for its clicked row.
So table view dot clicked row.
Yeah.
What, and if it's the header, then what would that be?
I think it's -1.
Okay.
If it's invalid, so you should check if it's greater than or equal to 0.
So we get that, and we can say guard orders. Yeah.
It's not optional, I think. Is it optional?
Okay, yeah, you're right. It's not optional.
You don't actually have to get the order because we're not going to pass it to the segue.
And so then we would implement the prepare for segue just like on iOS.
Yeah, you wouldn't do it here. You would implement prepare for segue, and then in there you would
do the
pass.
same thing. Yeah. So here, identifier is NSStoryboard.identifier segue.
Yeah, and this would be, we would probably be extending an NSStoryboard segue.identifier to make the code a little easier to read.
Okay. Double click, get a window.
There you go.
Awesome. Notice they're all going into the same spot. I know you can customize that.
Yeah, yeah. On the size inspector on Interface Builder, you have a default size and position and max size, min size, that stuff.
Well, awesome. I want to thank you so much for coming on the stream to walk me through this. I learned a whole lot about how Mac apps are structured. Even after shipping my own Mac app, I still have like tons and tons of questions just because I do iOS more often. So anyway, thanks a lot for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Maybe we should see if people on the chat have any questions before we go.
Yeah, definitely.
So if you guys have any questions, please send them immediately. I think there's a delay.
Yeah. Well, while they're doing that, I will, let's see, let's open up your Twitter account so people can follow you on Twitter.
Yeah.
It's _inside.
Chris is asking if we can convert this to marzipan.
Yeah. I have my fingertips at the ready as soon as it's.
You can also open learnappkit.io. So learnappkit.io is a project of mine, and the layout is broken on Firefox. So this is going to happen after WWDC this year because there were so many rumors and stuff about changes to Mac development that I decided to wait. But it's going to be some sort of guide to help people bring their iOS apps to the Mac. And you can subscribe in there to be notified when it's ready.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And of course, you can watch WWDC using my WWDC for Mac app, which is open source. So if you learned something cool today and you want to see what a quote-unquote real Mac app looks like, check it out. It's on GitHub.
Yeah, I use this all the time. It is super handy to just sort of catch up. Why
does it have a 2 at the end?
I think because you had shipped a new version, but I was still using the old version or something. So I had both of them on my machine at one point. But
just being careful with the migration.
So Chris is asking, aside from Learn App Kit, what are the best resources for learning Mac dev if you're still an iOS dev?
Well, this is the good question. Even I know some people that work on AppKit at Apple, and they know that this is a hard question to answer because really there aren't that many resources about this.
Yeah.
And it's an issue. We are trying to solve it. I know people at Apple are very passionate about working on improving the situation for learning AppKit. But if you look around, there are some tutorials on YouTube that I think you did something on NSScreencast, right?
Yeah, that was when I was first learning how to get set up, and I have a few videos on there on starting a Mac app. But it doesn't go very deep because I never got very deep. My Mac app has one window and a preferences window. I will say this, it's kind of hard to show on the screen because I'm doing chroma key. So this is actually a green book. Let me just see if I can turn off. Oh, well. I'll include a link to this book. It's
an invisible book.
Yeah, it's an invisible book, and it makes me invisible. Cocoa Programming for Mac OS X. This is the 3rd edition. I think there was another 1 or 2 editions. I bought this because this was the only way for me to learn Objective-C way back when I started. And so there were no books on iOS when I got started with iOS, and so I was just trying to figure out how do I write apps in Objective-C at all. And this book was really, really handy for learning that. And since AppKit is so old and crusty, basically all the materials are still pretty relevant. So
and I always suggest people read code from open source apps to learn how things are done.
Mm-hmm.
And also, if you are an iOS developer, after you get like the basics, like the some of the tricks we showed today about the responder chain and stuff, the sandboxing thing, you can just disable sandboxing. You don't have
Right.
to enable it. If you don't plan on shipping via the App Store, you don't have to worry about it. There are many answers on Stack Overflow for Mac development. I'm always looking on Stack Overflow for questions about Mac development, and I try to answer them when possible.
Mm-hmm.
So just try it. It's not that hard.
So Christoph says, "Isn't it very hard to do UI from code as the view hierarchy is so deep?" I'll take a stab at this, and I'd like to hear your input on it.
Cool.
I would say once you become really familiar with what you're trying to build, it becomes really easy for you to just mentally visualize what the hierarchy looks like in your head. I would not at all want to make a Mac app UI from code because I don't even know what it's supposed to look like yet. And so having that visual tool where it's almost what you see is what you get, and you can set up your constraints and your layout, and you can play with it and resize it within storyboards. That's all super helpful to me. But on iOS, I wouldn't say I would happily do it. I usually use storyboards, but I wouldn't complain too much if I was on a team that wanted to do the UI in code, because I see the value in being able to create your own abstractions in code and refactor things, use things like your own theming and fonts and colors all can come from structs rather than being stringly typed things in a text field in some preference pane somewhere. So there's definitely like trade-offs, right? But on a Mac app, because I'm still getting familiar with it, I would still probably use storyboards. But what's your input on this?
I'm a fan of doing UI in code. I'm at a point for both Mac and iOS development where I can, while I'm typing the code for the view hierarchy, I can imagine what it's going to look like on my head, and it usually looks like I imagined. Just it's something you end up getting when you're used to doing it that way. But I do understand that it is in fact a little bit harder on the Mac to do the UI in code. What I don't recommend people do is go full on with storyboards and segues. We've done it here, of course, to show people how it is the Apple recommended way to do things, but I don't really like segues because they couple your view controllers and it makes it harder to use the coordinator pattern, which is used for the WWDC app, which you're showing there. But if you look at the repo, you're going to see that I do in fact use, I think I use at least 2 zip files for some things that are like a little bit trickier. But everything you're seeing on that screenshot in there, that's all UI done in code. It used to be a lot harder. It's a little easier since Sierra because Apple added a lot of convenience initializers to NS button and NS text field and stuff to do some of those standard controls that you see on the sidebar on Interface Builder. You used to have to customize each and every property to get the desired result. But now they have convenience initializers and it's a lot easier. So I do recommend you do it in code, but if you're just getting started and you're just learning, if you use storyboards on iOS and you're used to that, just use storyboards. It's not that big of a deal.
Yeah. And we had one other comment here that said, why did we end up using user defaults if Keychain is the way to go? It's definitely more complex because Keychain is a C API, and it's not as easy as like a key value store. But there are wrappers. Right, there are wrappers that make it really easy to use. I think the real reason why I didn't want to use it for this example, aside from the fact I didn't prepare it ahead of time, is that binding preferences to user defaults is pretty common, and it enabled us to build this really quickly. But
I just want to make clear. I think Bogdan was asking if it's more complex on the Mac
than on iOS.
Keychain. And
that's the same framework, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely not the case. It's exactly the same code. If you had like a keychain wrapper that you use on your iOS app, you can probably just drag it over and use the exact same code. There are some differences because I think some of the after unlocked and before unlocked stuff is, of course, not applicable to the
Uh-huh.
Mac, but keychain itself is the same, so you can use the same code. We just didn't use it here for the reasons Ben was explaining.
Okay. Well, I think we'll go ahead and wrap this up. I don't see any other questions in there. If you do have a question after the fact, feel free to ping either of us on Twitter. You can get me at NSScreencast on Twitter, and Guy's Twitter here is at inside, twitter.com at
Underscore
underscore
inside.
inside. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I really had a good time doing this. I'd like to do it again sometime. So I'll probably be collecting some topics and things people are excited about, and continue. All right. Thanks
Awesome.
everybody for
So
watching.
thanks for having me, and thanks people for watching.